At 92 years old, you have already outlived most of your wishes. The big ones, the ones that required youth or strength, or the particular kind of hope that belongs to a person with decades still ahead of them, those have been fulfilled or surrendered or quietly transformed into something more fitting for a life in its final season. What remains, at that age, is something smaller and more essential: the wish to matter to the people you love, the wish to leave something behind that lasts, the wish to be seen, one final time, before the seeing is no longer possible. Ruby Jean Patterson had one wish left. She had carried it for 11 years without saying it aloud in any form that required an answer. Because at 81 she had decided that the people who loved her had done enough, and that making demands of enough them at this stage of her life was not who she intended to be. She had raised her family on the principle that love was demonstrated through what you gave, not what you asked for. And she was not about to abandon that principle simply because she was old. But her granddaughter had noticed. The way granddaughters who have paid close attention for decades notice things that the person being observed has taken great care to conceal. She had noticed. And she had acted. And what she had set in motion ended on a Tuesday afternoon in Nashville, Tennessee, on the stage of Family Feud, in front of Steve Harvey and a live studio audience. What Ruby Jean Patterson wished for was not a reunion in the conventional sense. It was not a lost person found or a silence broken. It was something quieter and in some ways more profound. A completion, a circle closed. A thing that had been promised and never delivered, returned at last by the only person still alive who could deliver it. Steve Harvey has hosted this show through many extraordinary moments. By his own account, this one was different. Not louder, not more dramatic. Different in the way that the things closest to the end of a life are different from everything that came before them. Distilled, clear, carrying the full weight of everything it has taken to arrive at this particular moment. Subscribe now and stay with this story to the end. This one is about what it means to honor a promise across a lifetime, and about what happens when someone is watching closely enough to make sure it is kept. Ruby Jean Patterson was born in 1932 in a small town in rural Tennessee. The eldest of 5 children in a family that worked the land and attended church and conducted itself with the particular dignity that certain families maintain, not because the world has given them reason to, but because they have decided, collectively and without announcement, that dignity is what they are. She had married at 20 to a man named Earl Patterson, a Korean War veteran who had come home from the peninsula in 1951 with a Purple Heart and a quietness about him that his family had learned to read rather than question. They had built a life together over 56 years in Nashville. Earl working in manufacturing, Ruby Jean raising their 4 children, and eventually returning to work as a seamstress after the youngest was in school. Earl had passed away in 1998. Ruby Jean had continued. To say that Ruby Jean Patterson was a formidable woman would be accurate but insufficient. She was the kind of person who organizes a community without being asked, who remembers every birthday in a family of 37 people, who prepares food for a funeral before the family has been notified, because she has been paying the kind of attention that allows you to anticipate grief before it arrives. At 92, she was physically smaller than she had been. The years had compacted her slightly, as they do, but her presence in a room had not diminished by a single degree. Her wish concerned her great-granddaughter, Destiny. Destiny Patterson was 19 years old. She had been raised from the age of 3, Prima, Riley, by Ruby Jean. After Destiny's mother, Ruby Jean's granddaughter, had encountered a series of circumstances that made consistent parenting impossible for several years. Ruby Jean had stepped in without discussion or complaint. The way she stepped into everything that needed doing, and had raised Destiny through childhood and adolescence with the full commitment of a woman who understood that the child in front of her needed stability above all else, and was prepared to provide it for as long as necessary. Destiny had graduated from high school in the spring, the first person in the immediate family to do so in 15 years. The graduation ceremony had taken place on a Thursday afternoon in May. Ruby Jean had been in the hospital that week with a respiratory infection. She had missed it. She had been told about it by phone, had cried quietly in her hospital room while the family was at the ceremony, and had said nothing to anyone about what that absence had cost her. What Ruby Jean had told her family, at various points over the preceding years, was that her one remaining wish was to see Destiny walk across a stage and receive something she had earned, to see it in person, to be present for a moment of accomplishment in this child's life. the way she had been present for every other significant moment. Fully, physically, irreplaceably there. The graduation had come and gone without her. The wish, she had decided, was simply one of the things that life does not always accommodate. She had moved forward. Her granddaughter, Tamara, Destiny's aunt, 38 years old, who had been watching Ruby Jean manage this particular disappointment with a composure that Tamara found both admirable and quietly heartbreaking, had contacted the Family Feud production team 4 months after the graduation. She had explained the situation in detail. The producers had worked with her, with Destiny's high school principal, and with the Nashville School District to arrange what followed. The team for the taping was Ruby Jean, Tamara, Destiny, Tamara's husband Kevin, and Ruby Jean's son, 68-year-old Bernard, Ruby Jean's youngest child, who had driven from Knoxville the previous afternoon and who had spent the drive preparing himself for a moment he had been told about in outline but that he suspected, correctly, would exceed anything he had imagined. The Patterson family arrived at the studio with the particular energy of a group assembled around a single gravitational center. Ruby Jean was that center. Every other family member moved in relation to her, adjusting their pace to hers, orienting toward her when the group paused, watching her face the way people watch the face of someone they love when that person is in a setting that requires more of them than usual, ready to intervene or support without being asked. Ruby Jean required no intervention. She walked into the studio at her own pace, sat where she was directed, and looked around the set with the composed, appreciative attention of someone who has not allowed age to diminish their curiosity. When Steve Harvey walked out and the audience applauded, she applauded with them fully, with both hands, the way she had been taught as a child that you applaud for someone who has come to work. Steve Harvey noticed her immediately. In a studio full of contestants, a 92-year-old woman has a presence that requires no particular effort to detect. He made his way to the Patterson family early in the pre-game warm-up, and what followed was a conversation that the production team later described as the most naturally complete pre-reveal exchange they had ever recorded. He asked her name. She told him. He asked her age. She told him 92 with the directness of someone who considers the number a straightforward fact rather than a delicate subject. Steve Harvey said, 92. Ma'am, how are you even here right now? Ruby Jean said, I asked the Lord for one more good day. He provided. The audience responded. Steve Harvey smiled the real smile. He said, you enjoying yourself? She said, I am enjoying myself very much. I like it when things are lively. He said, you got family here with you today? She gestured to the team beside her. Tamara, Destiny, Kevin, Bernard with the proprietary pride of a woman who has spent 7 decades building something and is pleased with how it has turned out. She introduced each of them by name and relationship with a precision that indicated she had not lost a single degree of her recall. When she came to Destiny, something shifted in the quality of her voice, not dramatically. The sentence was the same in structure as the ones that preceded it. This is my great-granddaughter, Destiny. She raised her, but the weight it carried was visibly different. And Steve Harvey, who had been listening to the texture behind people's words for 30 years, heard it. He said, she raised her. Ruby Jean said, from 3 years old. She is my heart. Steve said, how old is she now? Ruby Jean said, 19. She graduated from high school this past spring. First in the family in a long while. Steve said, were you there? The pause that followed was brief. A single second, but it was the most informative second in the entire pre-game conversation. Ruby Jean held it with composure, then said, I was in the hospital. I missed it. She did not add anything. She did not reach for the emotion or explain the weight of the absence. She simply stated the fact with the flat honesty of a woman who has had months to arrive at acceptance and has done so, even if acceptance and peace are not entirely the same thing. Steve Harvey looked at her. He looked at Destiny, who was studying the floor with the careful stillness of a 19-year-old who knows that the subject being discussed is one she cannot navigate in public without losing her composure. He looked at Tamara, who met his gaze briefly and then looked away. He said quietly and without further elaboration, well, let's play some Family Feud. The game proceeded. The Patterson family played with a warmth and collective intelligence that drew sustained affection from the audience. Ruby Jean's contributions were precise and delivered with a timing that repeatedly surprised the room. She had a gift for the common sense answer that survey-based game shows reward, and she deployed it with a quiet, self-contained satisfaction that the audience found entirely endearing. Steve Harvey told her at one point that she was the most dangerous player he had encountered in 300 episodes. She accepted this assessment without false modesty. They won the main game. The celebration was warm and unguarded, Bernard lifting his arms, Tamara embracing destiny, Kevin shaking his head with the expression of a man who had doubted and been corrected. Ruby Jean smiled with a fullness that the cameras caught clearly, and that the production team, watching the monitors in real time, recognized as the smile of someone who has had exactly the good day they asked for. Then Steve Harvey moved toward the fast money setup. He paused before directing anyone to the podium. He looked at Ruby Jean with an expression that was deliberate and settled, the expression of a man who has made a decision and is ready to honor it. He said, "Before we get to fast money, I need to do something first." He looked at the audience, then back at Ruby Jean. He said, "Miss Ruby, you told me something earlier that I've been sitting with. You told me you missed your great-granddaughter's graduation because you were in the hospital." Ruby Jean said, "That is correct." Steve Harvey said, "You said seeing her walk across a stage was something you wanted. Something you did not get." Ruby Jean said, "I said I missed it. I did not say I wanted anything about it." Steve Harvey smiled. He said, "No, ma'am, you did not. Someone else said it for you." He looked toward the stage entrance. He said, "Miss Ruby, have been working on something, with some people who love you and a few people who wanted to help, and I need you to stay right where you are for just a moment." What happened next had been arranged with the cooperation of Destiny's high school principal, the Nashville School District, and two members of the school's teaching staff who had driven to the studio that morning and were standing backstage in their academic regalia. The school's graduation processional music began to play through the studio speakers. The audience, which had not been briefed, took approximately 3 seconds to understand what was happening. In those 3 seconds, the room went from the warm, expectant silence of a game show audience awaiting a surprise to something entirely different. The held breath stillness of people who have grasped simultaneously that what they are witnessing is real and significant and will not be repeated. Destiny Patterson walked out from the stage entrance. She was wearing her graduation gown and cap, the same ones from the May ceremony, kept carefully by Tamara in a garment bag for 4 months, against this possibility. She was carrying her diploma. She walked the length of the stage slowly and deliberately, the way she had been coached to walk at graduation, the way she had walked in May when the one person she most wanted to be in the audience was not there. Ruby Jean Patterson saw her great-granddaughter walk across a stage. She did not make a sound for the first several seconds. She sat completely upright in the way she always sat, the posture of a woman who had been told as a girl that how you hold yourself is a statement about what you think of yourself. And she watched with the full, undefended attention of someone receiving something they had stopped expecting. Then her hand came up to cover her mouth, and then, quietly and without any attempt at concealment, Ruby Jean Patterson, 92 years old, a woman who had managed every difficulty of a very long life with composure and forward motion, began to cry. Destiny crossed the stage and came to her great-grandmother. She crouched down in front of her so that their eyes were level and held out the diploma. She said, "Grandma Ruby, I got it for you." Ruby Jean took the diploma in both hands. She held it the way she held things that mattered, firmly, with full attention, as if the object itself needed to know it was being received properly. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she looked at Destiny. She said, "Baby, you got it for yourself. I am just glad I got to see it." Destiny put her head on her great-grandmother's shoulder. Ruby Jean's hand came up and rested on her great-granddaughter's mortarboard. And the two of them remained exactly like that, a 19-year-old in a graduation gown and a 92-year-old woman in the best dress she owned, while the entire studio held very still around them. Steve Harvey was standing several feet away. His jaw was tight. His eyes were full. He was looking at the two of them with an expression that had no professional element in it whatsoever. Just a man, moved beyond his usual register, watching something that he understood completely and that required nothing from him except presence. Two of the teachers who had driven from the school that morning were standing at the side of the stage in their academic regalia. One of them was crying openly. The other was holding it together by the narrowest possible margin. When Steve Harvey finally spoke, his voice was lower than its usual register, and he did not try to bring it back up. He said, "Miss Ruby, I want you to know something. Your granddaughter Tamara called this show and told us what you had missed, and what it meant to you. She did that because she was paying attention. because she loves you the way you raised this family to love each other, by showing up, by noticing, and by doing the thing that needs doing without waiting to be asked. He paused. That is you, our legacy right there. Not just destiny walking across that stage, but the fact that the people around you paid close enough attention to know what you needed before you would ever say it. He looked at Destiny. He said, "Young lady, you got your diploma in May, but you delivered it today. And I think you know which one of those two moments is going to matter more to you for the rest of your life." Destiny nodded. She could not speak, and she did not try. Steve Harvey turned to the audience. He said with a simplicity that required no embellishment, 92 years old, one wish, and it got here. The audience rose. The fast money round was completed. Bernard and Tamara stepped in, and the Patterson family won $18,000, a number that Steve Harvey rounded up to $20,000 from his foundation before the announcement was made because, as he told his production team afterward, it would have felt wrong to let the arithmetic be the last word. Ruby Jean Patterson remained in the studio for nearly 2 hours after the taping. She sat in a comfortable chair that the production team had positioned near the stage, and family members and several members of the studio audience who had remained, declining to leave when the formal session ended, came to her in a steady, unhurried stream. She spoke to each of them. She did not tire visibly. She had come for a good day, and the good day was continuing, and she intended to be fully present in it for as long as it lasted. At one point, a woman from the audience in her late 60s, by appearance, accompanied by an adult daughter, approached Ruby Jean and said simply that she had a mother in a nursing home in Memphis, whom she had been meaning to visit for 3 months and had not yet managed to go. She said she was going to go that weekend. Ruby Jean looked at her for a moment and then said, "Good, go Saturday, not Sunday. People have more time on Saturdays." The woman laughed. She went on Saturday. When the episode aired 6 weeks after the taping, it became the most shared Family Feud segment in the show's history within the first 72 hours. The detail that drove the sharing was not the graduation walk itself, though. The graduation walk was the emotional centerpiece, but the moment immediately preceding it. Ruby Jean's response to Steve Harvey's question about whether she had attended. She had said without self-pity or performance, "I was in the hospital. I missed it." 5 words, the absence of grievance in them, the composure of a woman who has decided not to be owed anything by life and who maintains that decision even when life has been genuinely unkind. Viewers described recognizing something in that composure that was both humbling and clarifying. The clip prompted a public conversation about elderly family members, about the wishes that older people carry quietly rather than burden those around them with, and about the particular blind spot that families can develop around the emotional needs of their oldest members. Geriatric care specialists and family therapists appeared in media discussions across the following weeks, several of them using Ruby Jean's situation as an illustration of how often the most significant unmet needs in a family system belong to the person everyone assumes has already been provided for. Steve Harvey addressed the episode with an extended personal reflection. He wrote about Ruby Jean's answer. "I asked the Lord for one more good day," he provided, and said it was the sentence that had told him, immediately and without ambiguity, the kind of person he was dealing with. He wrote, "A woman who frames her presence on a game show as an answered prayer is a woman who has made peace with the size of her requests. She was not asking for much. She was asking for one good day. It is the job of the people who love her to understand that one good day, for someone at 92, can contain a very specific and very irreplaceable thing." Tamara understood that. "I am grateful." She did. He also wrote about the decision Destiny had made, to wear the graduation gown, to carry the actual diploma, to walk the stage again, not for herself, but entirely for her great-grandmother. He wrote, "Destiny already had her graduation. She had already walked that stage. She did it again on a Tuesday afternoon in Nashville because she understood that the first time had been incomplete without the one witness who mattered most. That is not a small thing. That is the kind of love that you cannot teach and cannot perform. It is simply who some people are." Destiny enrolled at Nashville State Community College that autumn, studying nursing. She has said publicly that the decision was not unconnected to watching her great-grandmother manage the indignities of age, with self-possession and grace, that spending her most formative years in Ruby Jean's care had given her a particular respect for elderly people and a desire to work in contexts where that respect had practical application. Ruby Jean attended Destiny's first day of college orientation. She was accompanied by Tamara, who pushed her wheelchair through the campus with the same attentiveness she had brought to everything involving Ruby Jean. For the past decade, Destiny's classmates, encountering a 92-year-old woman in the orientation hall, responded with a warmth and curiosity that suggested they understood they were in the presence of something not ordinarily. Encountered in a college orientation session, Ruby Jean told two of them, with complete seriousness, that it was never too late to start something, and that they should write that down. They wrote it down. Bernard, Ruby Jean's youngest son, gave one brief interview in which he said the thing that several other family members had expressed in similar terms, but that he stated most directly. He said, "My mother spent her whole life being the person who gave things. She gave time. She gave care. She gave attention. She raised children that were not even hers to raise without a word of complaint. She never asked for anything back. The fact that Tamara noticed what she was carrying and did something about it, that is my mother's legacy coming back to her. That is what she taught this family. She taught us to pay attention to what the people we love actually need." And Tamara paid attention. I am prouder of that than I can say. Ruby Jean Patterson attended 3 more family occasions in the year following the taping: Thanksgiving, Christmas, and Destiny's end-of-year academic review, at which Destiny presented her with a printed copy of her grade report. Ruby Jean reviewed it with the precision of someone who had always taken academic performance seriously and confirmed, after a thorough examination, that it met her standards. Destiny said it was the best review she had ever received. Steve Harvey visited Nashville 6 months after the taping for an unrelated speaking engagement. He stopped by the Patterson family home for an hour in the afternoon. Ruby Jean was there. She was, by every account, exactly as she had been in the studio, composed, present, fully herself. She told Steve Harvey that the show had given her the best day she had had in years, and he told her that she had given him the best moment he had had in decades, and they agreed that this was an equitable exchange. When Steve Harvey left, Ruby Jean told Tamara that he was a good man and that she could tell because he listened rather than just waiting for his turn to speak. Tamara relayed this observation to Steve Harvey through his production team. He framed it and placed it on his desk. At 92 years old, Ruby Jean Patterson had asked the Lord for one more good day. She had received it in full measure. Not just the afternoon in the studio, but the year that followed. The college enrollment, the grade report, the hour with Steve Harvey. The 1,000 small confirmations that the family she had built over 7 decades was intact and paying attention and carrying forward everything she had given it. She had made one final wish. It had been granted. And then, as tends to happen when a life has been well and fully lived, the granting of it had opened into something larger, not an ending, but a continuation, quieter and more complete than anything a single wished-for moment could contain. Some stories close with a flourish. This one closed the way Ruby Jean Patterson had always preferred things to close. Cleanly, without fuss, with everyone accounted for and nothing left undone. If this story stayed with you, please like this video and subscribe. These are the moments that remind us to pay attention to the people who have stopped asking. We will see you in the next one.